Hmm. Can everyone hear me? Hi.
Hi.
You can hear my son crying. You can hear me probably. His timing's impeccable. Yes, it is. It's part two. Let's see. Announcements. Don't forget about today's extra credit panel. We have a panel. I think there's a panel today on, oh, I forgot. It's on sports and video games, I think. And so don't forget to sign up. I think they have the deadline at 4 o'clock, I believe. If I remember correctly. I sent you all the information that I have. So um, please sign up if you have a chance. Let's see. Don't forget about taking the test that's this week. We're not having a quiz this week, but that being said, we the next few quizzes we have because we only have, believe it or not, guys and ladies, we're down to like what, 4 weeks before the end of the semester, something like that. It's getting pretty close. So these next few quizzes are going to be pretty long because I'm going to try to catch up because my our quizzes are behind my lectures. Do we have to catch up? Well, if you want a study guide for if you want a study guide for the third test, then yes, you need to catch up. I know you're kidding. The whole point of the quizzes is to give you a study guide. So that way you kind of like, you got a sense of the questions that I'm going to ask you and you have the correct answers. Anyways, so today we're going to finish talking about radio. It is part two. We're going to get into college sports as well because we're going to transition into sports because we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on radio because I'm not. It is evolving. I'm not going to say it's dying, but it is evolving. It's becoming a whole different thing. And so I generally don't spend a whole lot of time on radio because most of you, uh, well, based on the amount of money that the radio industry is making, you don't seem very interested in it. Maybe you are. Uh, maybe I could be really wrong. So, anyways, without, oh, there's a question. Would all of these next quizzes be more important? Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, because um, there's going to be more questions, so that's going to be worth more points. So yes, Marcella, I would definitely say the next three quizzes are going to be more important than the other quizzes, simply because there's just more points. Because again, like our lectures are ahead, way ahead of our of the quizzes. So yes.
Dr. Puente, I'm actually not able to see the correct answers for this last quiz we took.
Oh, okay, I got to make. That means I have to make it available to see. So I got to click it. You got to please remind me. I don't know who said that, but please remind me.
Carol. I'm Carol. It's Carol.
Carol, I see.
Yeah.
I can't see who's talking.
Oh, okay. It's okay. Yeah, I just want to let you know that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you for telling me. Otherwise, I would not know. I thought I cleared them all, but I guess not. So, anyways, traditional radio, as I sort of just said already, it's struggling to attract listeners. I think primarily it's because we have lots of choices, right? This is one of the reasons why we're not or opting not to listen to traditional radio. I mean, you can listen to music on your phone, you can listen to Spotify, Pandora, you know, there's satellite radio. Heck, there's still even CDs. For those of you who still have them. There's all these different choices that you have. You can listen to music on YouTube. And so you really the idea of tuning in to a radio station to listen to music is becoming sort of obsolete because of the number of choices that we have. And so it's not surprising that traditional radio is struggling. So as you can see here, right, Pandora is the largest of the internet radio networks. Unfortunately, and this is because of the National Association of Broadcasters, the NAB, because I think it's in the book too. So anyways, the National Association of Broadcasters is the trade organization that oversees traditional radio and television. And so basically lobbied Congress to essentially make operating internet radio more difficult. And so Pandora is paying these high licensing fees. So licensing meaning permission to play music. They're paying these huge fees that traditional radio doesn't have to pay. And also these acquisition fees in order to acquire music. And it's completely unfair. There are fees that traditional radio doesn't pay. And so this is why, at least historically, and I think this is still the case, even though Pandora is making more and more money over the years, it's still losing money. So I'm not sure when they'll exactly break even. And so Pandora was acquired, the question here, it was acquired by SiriusXM. So it was acquired by SiriusXM. In terms of the streaming area of radio, as you can see here, right, Spotify, Apple Music, they're fighting for the top position. Amazon Music has emerged as a choice for streaming. And so Spotify right now is number one, at least globally. But again, Spotify, like Pandora, is paying these huge licensing fees, these licensing costs. Again, licensing means permission to play music. And it's just, it's a little bit unfair, but life is unfair, I suppose. So the streaming market is growing, the internet radio market is growing. But again, both types of platforms are struggling because of these high licensing fees. And so I think as more and more subscribers make their way over to Pandora or over to Spotify, I think eventually they'll be okay. But right now they are struggling because of these high licensing costs. So Sirius XM radio. So Sirius merged with XM in 2008. This is a terrible sentence. But so Sirius merged with XM in 2008. So essentially became a monopoly, even though Sirius and XM, when they both started, it was a duopoly. When they both started, they basically told Congress or promised Congress that they would merge. And so, but unfortunately, they did merge and they became a monopoly. And so the reason that our court system decided to allow the merger was because they basically argued or said that satellite radio isn't going to dominate our listening because there's so many options and choices out there. You don't have to buy a subscription with satellite radio, so because you have lots of options, and so therefore the merger will be just fine. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it is what it is. And so SiriusXM has well over 35 million subscribers. They offer different packages in terms of pricing. One thing that I think is a good deal for them is that they have these long-term deals with automakers. So these automakers essentially, when they produce their cars, this SiriusXM is, I think, is given to you as an option for you to purchase in these cars, and so that's cool. And again, as I said already before, they acquired Pandora Media in 2019, the largest internet radio company. So I think SiriusXM will be a force moving forward, but right now it's not a huge force because again, there's lots of competition in the radio industry? That's a question. Did anyone get acquired by the Pandora? Got acquired by SiriusXM. Yes, well, it's because, Amanda, to answer your question, yes, it's because these auto dealers struck a deal with Sirius, so um, it was forced as an option, yes. And they're hoping that the you using the satellite radio for a period of time is going to you're going to adopt it. In other words, so because it's in your car, I know you find it annoying, but they're hoping that you're going to get over your annoyance and actually like it, and then subscribe and become a long-term subscriber to Sirius. So that's the the plan, or the tactic, I should say. But we'll see if that actually ends up being true moving forward. I don't know.
They did not get me with that.
Uh,
But it's just
okay.
it's weird because they offered it for what is it, 60 or 90 days, and then
Right, for free, right?
still, yeah, but
Mhm.
it's still an option. It's like whatever, like Apple CarPlay, music, radio, and then XM. But even though I've said that I don't want XM, it's like it will always forever be an option in my car, even though I don't want to pay for it. But besides that, I was a little confused actually, just with the PowerPoint on under Spotify and Apple Music, where it says streaming position in the U.S. Spotify #1 globally. Is it number one in the just the U.S., or are you also
No,
saying it's
they're
number
fighting
one?
for the top, they're fighting for the top position in the U.S. I think they are number one in the U.S., but they're going back and forth.
Okay, just the word globally is next to it also, so I'm not
Because
sure.
they are number one globally. Throughout the world, Spotify's number one. It's the number one streaming service in the world.
Okay, so they're just also fighting for US, like back to back. Okay,
Well, but it's not clear they're number one in streaming because Apple and them are pretty close.
gotcha.
But Spotify globally, outside of the United States, is clearly number one.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Yeah, this is kind of a bad slide. Sorry.
Oh, what was the question mark for serious? I'm so sorry. I missed that one.
Derek, for serious, it became a monopoly. It became a monopoly when they merged with XM. Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? Okay, so podcasting, whose idea was it? So it was actually Adam Curry and David Weiner. David Weiner, I'm sure nobody's heard of David Weiner per se, but you may have heard of Adam Curry. Is anybody familiar with the name Adam Curry? Most of you are pretty young, so you probably aren't familiar with him. I'm just curious. Anybody familiar with Adam Curry? Do any of you watch MTV? Just out of curiosity. Okay, not anymore. Well, okay. Well, Jared, um, so when I talk about MTV, I'm not talking about the current right now. I'm talking like the old, like some of the old stuff, the old MTV, like when old MTV's just first started way back in the 80s. Nobody? So Jared might, I don't know if Jared watched any of the old stuff. But anyways, um, Adam Curry was one of the original set of VJs, the video disc jockeys. They used to call them VJs, the video jockeys. And Adam Curry was one of these early VJs on MTV. And, he was pretty famous for a while. He had, good-looking guy with long, wavy brown hair. And so it was his idea to, along with David Weiner, to start podcasting. That's where it started. That's where the idea of podcasting starts, with those two guys. And so the goal, or the objective of, I should say the goal of podcasting, is to extend the reach of anyone, right? Anybody can create a podcast. Any of you can create a podcast. And it's completely changed and altered broadcasting, especially talk shows, because the thought was, when podcasting was just emerging, was that radio stations were getting rid of a lot of talk shows, especially talk shows on FM. And so this long form of talking, radio station owners didn't think that people wanted to listen to hear people talk. And turns out that they were wrong. And so as traditional radio broadcasters were closing the door on talk shows, it kind of opened the door for podcasting, these talk shows to emerge on podcasts. And so right now, the highest earning podcaster is a guy by the name of Joe Rogan. I don't know if anybody's heard of Joe Rogan or listens to Joe Rogan. I mean, I listen to his shows because he has some interesting guests at times. Not all of his guests are interesting, but some of his guests are interesting. And so Spotify actually ended up buying his show. So Spotify bought the Joe Rogan Experience. Yes, I like him too. I don't know about love, but I like him. I think he's a cool guy. I think of Joe Rogan as sort of being this sort of like Renaissance man, right? If you think about him, this martial artist who becomes a comedian, martial artist that becomes a comedian, and then is an actor, remains a comedian, becomes a broadcaster for UFC, and now owns or broadcasts the most lucrative podcasts in the United States and perhaps even the world. But again, so Spotify, again, this is important, Spotify paid Joe Rogan $30 million a year. So Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan Experience, right? He is the highest earning podcaster. So if you're not familiar, this is a little bit about talking about why Spotify bought the Joe Rogan podcast.
Hello, everybody. I have an announcement. The podcast is moving to Spotify.
Joe Rogan, one of the world's most popular podcasters, is making his show, The Joe Rogan Experience, a Spotify exclusive. This is huge industry-changing news. The show hasn't even been available on Spotify up until this point, and the company is reportedly spending potentially more than $100 million to bring it over. This means that if you want to listen to The Rogan Show, you're going to have to download Spotify. Now, you probably think more of music than podcasting when you hear Spotify's name, but this Rogan deal is actually an essential part of the company's plan to become the biggest name in audio. To understand why, we have to look at the big picture. Spotify made its podcasting ambitions known in 2019 with 3 acquisitions. Basically back to back, it bought 2 podcast networks, Gimlet Media and Partcast, and a podcast creation company called Anchor. Altogether, the company spent around $400 million for those 3 companies combined. Then this year, it also acquired The Ringer and Bill Simmons' flagship show for reportedly around $196 million. The team spent a lot of money, all in an effort to lock down some of the industry's top content, committing it to Spotify's library. But Spotify attempted exclusives with big-name record releases, and the strategy failed years ago. So why is it investing so much in podcasts now? It's about getting people to use its app. Similarly to how Amazon knows the items people most want to buy and develops its own products around that data, Spotify knows what content listeners search for the most, and that data informs its purchasing decisions. The company said when it bought Rogan's show that it was one of the most searched for podcasts. It needed the show to become the go-to place for listening, And this is critical. Rogan's show is free to listen to. People don't need Spotify Premium to hear or watch it. Instead, they pay with their data. Spotify also doesn't need people to subscribe because it makes money in a more traditional way, too.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Stamps.com. We've been sponsored by Stamps.com for 7 years now. It's amazing.
There's never been a single podcast company that sells ads, makes content, has a popular podcast player, and gives people the tools to create their own shows. Spotify now has all of that. It's just a question of getting people to use it. Big names like Joe Rogan bring people to the platform, but a large show library keeps them there. Spotify says it has more than 1 million podcasts available and that during the first quarter of 2020, 70% of shows were created with Anchor. On top of all these acquisitions and deals, Spotify also created new tech for generating playlists and inserting ads. It now algorithmically generates podcast playlists and launched its own advertising tool called Streaming Ad Insertion, which allows targeted ads to be placed into shows as people listen to them, which again relies on that critical user data we talked about earlier. And then, of course, it launched video podcasts in-app, which allows it to sway some of YouTube's popular podcasters over to its platform. Spotify sees a big opportunity for podcasts because, for one, the competition isn't very strong. Apple, the biggest name in podcasting up until now, has mostly left its product alone, letting listeners freely come and go and allowing all creators to upload their RSS feeds without Apple trying to own any show exclusively. It doesn't make its own shows right now, and it doesn't sell ads, which would go against its privacy-oriented positioning anyway. Spotify can totally own this space.
So she makes some really good points that Spotify can really own this space. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do moving forward. So as you can see here, oops, questions. $30 million a year. Yes, they're paying. That's how much Spotify is paying Joe Rogan. And so I'm not sure how long that contract is lasting for, but I know they were paying him $30 million for this year, and I'm not sure for how many years, but that's a lot of money to be a podcaster. But hey, good for him. What else was I going to say? So, as she was saying, one of the things that they're going to rely on is the fact that Joe Rogan does attract a large number of folks to listen to him. And so as you can see here, right, Joe Rogan's show, The Joe Rogan Experience, has about 190 million downloads per month. So that's about, approaching 200 million per month. So I think it's probably a good purchase, again, because if you ever listen to Joe Rogan's show, he always announces advertisers that are part of the show. So the first 4 or 5 minutes of the show is him basically talking about a particular advertiser. So it's good for him, good for the advertiser, and again, good for Spotify. So Sound Exchange. So Sound Exchange is the question. So again, Sound Exchange collects digital performance royalties. And again, this is where a big chunk of satellite radio's revenue goes to, is to pay for these digital performance royalties. And again, this is where also Spotify pays a lot of money. This is also where Pandora pays a lot of money. They're paying a lot in these digital performance royalties. So anytime you stream, essentially it's supposed to get collected by Sound Exchange. So iHeartMedia is the largest owner of radio stations. So iHeartMedia is the second largest owner of radio stations. It is a distant second place to Pandora in terms of being the second largest internet radio network. Again, distant second from Pandora. And WTOP, WTOP, actually used to listen to this station when I used to live in Washington, D.C. And so WTOP in Washington, D.C. is the number one station in terms of advertising revenue. And so they've been number one for quite a long time, far ahead of the number two station, which historically has been Kiss FM, that generates the second most in revenue. So again, WTOP, which is in DC, Washington, DC, our nation's capital, has been number one in advertising revenue at $69 million. Not bad. iHeartMedia. And so what is the largest radio and satellite company? Should be largest radio and / satellite radio company. And that would be Sirius XM Radio. So what is the largest radio / satellite radio company? Sirius XM Radio. And number two, again, is iHeartMedia. But iHeartMedia, again, is the largest owner of radio stations. So what format generates the most advertising revenue? That is adult contemporary. So what format generates the most advertising revenue? That is adult contemporary. So if you think about adult contemporary, it's sort of like, I guess it would be stations like Kiss FM would be an example of adult contemporary. What is the most popular radio format in the country? And that would be country music. And what was the last bullet? I haven't gotten to the last bullet yet.
I meant on the last slide.
The last slide, the last bullet, WTOP?
Yeah, that one.
It's the large station that generates the most ad revenue.
Okay. And then, sorry, what was the first question on this one? The largest satellite radio company?
Sirius XM.
Okay, thank you.
What format has the highest AQH? AQH is average quarter hour. So it means it measures the number of listeners by average quarter hour, which means every 15 minutes. And so the format that has the highest AQH is news and talk. So the format that has the highest average quarterly hour listeners, again, every 15 minutes, is news and talk. Questions? So just to kind of give you an idea of different stations that iHeartMedia owns, again, it's the largest owner of radio stations. So as you can see here, they own a whole bunch of stations here in the Los Angeles and San Bernardino area, just to kind of give you an idea. And again, iHeartMedia is the largest owner of radio stations, but again, they are not the largest of the they're not the largest radio company in terms of revenue. And if you're curious about the market structure would be an oligopoly, because there's a handful of companies that make most of the money. All right, so format. So think of the format as being the personality of the radio station. And the personality of the radio station is determined by three things. So number one is, what's the genre? What's the genre of the station? So is it news talk? Is it country? Is it adult contemporary? Is it jazz? What's the genre? Is it the other? Number two is era. So are we talking about contemporary modern music, or are we talking about oldies? Right nowadays, oldies is 80s music or even 90s music, which makes me feel really old. But the era, so it used to be when I was a kid, and the oldies were considered 50s and 60s, but now I guess I'm an oldie. And also the activity level. So what's the activity level of the music? Is it more, is it love songs or mellow or romantic music, or is it more upbeat and dance music? So those are the three factors that determine, again, format, format means the personality of the radio station, which again is determined by the genre, the era, the activity. Nowadays, what's happening in the radio industry is that they're practicing a narrowcasting. So narrowcasting meaning that they're targeting very small slivers of listeners. So a small sliver of listeners. And so what I mean by this is when I was a kid growing up in Los Angeles, in the LA area, I would listen to the radio, and you can close your eyes and you can make a clear distinction between K-Rock, Power 106, what else was Kiss FM, what was the other one? KLOS, and I'm trying to remember what else was big, but I think Coast. But anyways, the point is that you could close your eyes and you can make a clear distinction. Oh, what station am I listening to? Oh, I'm listening to this. But nowadays, at least it seems to me that it's really hard to tell what kind of music that you're listening to. Well, what station you're listening to, because oftentimes the same music is played on different radio stations that initially seem to be very different. So meaning that if you closed your eyes now, K-Rock and Kiss play very similar music. You can't really tell the difference nowadays. At least I can't. It makes them old. Also the playlist. So the playlist is geared to fit the format. So if your playlist, let's say it's country, obviously you're gonna develop and come up with a playlist of obviously the most popular country performers, right? If your playlist happens to be, let's say, adult contemporary, you're gonna fill it up with, the most popular at the time pop music. And the whole point of the playlist is you're going to play artists, right, that are popular, that are going to attract that target audience. So that's the hope. And so what is this target audience? Well, it depends on the format. Nowadays, the biggest listeners, which this isn't necessarily the most lucrative target audience, is people between the ages of 50 to 64 are the people that are more apt to listen to the radio, but that audience isn't necessarily the prime target audience for a lot of these radio stations. So lucrative target audiences determine formats. So for instance, if you think about a station like Jack, I don't know if anybody listens to Jack, they play a lot of oldies music. And so, as I said before, people between the ages of 50 to 64 are the highest group of listeners. And so those folks, right, these older folks or middle-aged folks, are very happy with traditional radio. They grew up with it. And so Jack is targeting that particular audience. That's their target audience. So if you ever listen to Jack radio, a lot of their music is from the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. It's because they're targeting this age group of 50 to 64. That's the biggest audience of radio listeners. Now, all of you who are younger, you didn't necessarily grow up per se with traditional radio. And so also advertisers determine formats. So some advertisers, well, not should say lots of advertisers are targeting, obviously, oftentimes a younger demographic or a certain demographic, and they're going to buy ads on that particular type of genre or format. And so advertisers play a huge role in determining what formats remain on radio. Format consultants. So a format consultant determines or helps, let's say somebody buys a radio station and they don't know what kind of format to put in. And so they might, they're going to bring in a format consultant, and this format consultant is going to tell them, well, right now, the genres that are increasing are XYZ. So they might tell the radio station owner, okay, well, right now there's an uptick in Spanish language radio. Maybe you should make your format into, let's say, Spanish language. Or they might say news and talk is popular, make it into a news and talk. Or country music is a popular format, make it into a country music format. So format consultants, again, play a huge role in determining the kind of formats that are going to be played in that particular market. So for instance, there used to be a blues. Well, blues used to be kind of big at one point in time in jazz, but over time, it's very difficult to find many jazz stations or blues stations, unfortunately. So I kind of like jazz. Anyways, again, what's the most popular format in terms of number of stations? Again, it's country music is the most popular format in terms of number of stations. So the National Association of Broadcasters, as I talked to them about earlier, they're the trade organization that oversees the industry. They are politically very powerful, not because radio is, powerful, but it's because TV is powerful still. And so they protect the interest of radio and television broadcasters. So does anybody know what a pirate radio station is? Just out of curiosity. A pirate radio station? Does anybody have any idea what a pirate radio station is? Crickets. So I'm assuming nobody knows because I hear crickets. So a pirate radio station essentially is a station that doesn't possess an FCC license to broadcast. So again, does not possess an FCC license to broadcast. And so what happens oftentimes is that you have these individuals that broadcast without a proper FCC license. And so they start to interfere with the signal of a radio station owner who does possess an FCC license. And so, these radio station owners are paying a lot of money and they don't want their signal interfered by this pirate radio station person who, again, doesn't possess an FCC license to broadcast. And as I mentioned before, they've been lobbying very hard against satellite radio, essentially, again, forcing satellite radio to pay these huge licensing fees for music. So the Federal Radio Commission was the original name of the FCC. So the Federal Radio Commission, again, was the early version of the FCC when it became clear that the FCC, that Federal Radio Commission was going to be regulating other things besides radio. They changed their name to the Federal Communications Commission. And so again, Federal Radio Commission was the first organization, government organization that regulated radio, and their first license was given to KDKA. So first license was given to KDKA. So KDKA is famous because it was the first radio station to broadcast a lot of famous sporting events. So KDKA. And so the the FCC, of the Federal Communications Commission, made up of 5 people, regulates broadcasting. So again, regulates broadcasting. What I mean by regulates broadcasting, it has a set of rules, right? Again, a set of rules. And these set of rules are, for instance, a disc jockey can't curse or do any things that are profane. So for instance, when Howard Stern was a disc jockey on traditional terrestrial radio, he got fined a lot for, all sorts of things. And that's because he was breaking the broadcasting rules. And so spectrum allocation. So how do I explain this? So every radio station is supposed to play, is given an allocation of airspace on their band, on the radio band that they're supposed to be playing on. And so, for instance, when I used to work in radio with KGGI, they had their antenna behind, oh gosh, what high school was it? Gosh. San Gregorio High School. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of San Gregorio High School. I'm not even sure if it even exists anymore. But it was this high school out in San Bernardino. And there was this huge antenna behind the high school. And sometimes myself and the engineer would drive over, and I had the key. That's why I had to let him in. And so I would open the gate, and he'd go up to this huge antenna, and he would climb it without any straps or anything. Mind you, this was a gigantic antenna. I'm not even kidding. It's like 300 feet up, probably. So he would climb up this ladder to the top of the antenna to fix the spectrum. In other words, because sometimes the radio wave would interfere with other radio waves, and so KGGI was only given a certain bandwidth, and so wouldn't interfere with the other signals. And so license renewal. So license renewals are pretty easy. Basically, what they have to do nowadays is just make sure they're meeting the public interest. Make sure that they're meeting the public interest. So, for example, a radio station might just broadcast things like "What's going on this weekend?" That's and then broadcast these various events that are happening in the community. So all they got to do is make sure they're meeting the public interest. So make sure they're meeting the public interest. And if they meet the public interest, they get their license renewed. It's pretty simple nowadays. So the Telecom Act. Telecom Act signed under President, I think, Bill Clinton in 1996. So the objective, or I should say the goal of the Telecom Act is supposed to increase the number of owners that could potentially own radio stations. But it turned out it worked the opposite way, or it turned out to be complete opposite. So what ended up happening instead is that it reduced the number of companies that owned radio stations. It was supposed to increase the number, but it ended up reducing instead. And so, for example, it increased the number of stations one company could own from 4 to 8. So it increased the number of stations that one company could own from 4 to 8. In other words, a company like iHeartMedia could now own, for instance, 8 radio stations in a market like Los Angeles. So it increased the number of stations one company could own from 4 to 8. And now one company can own 5 stations in a smaller city. Let's say they define a smaller city with 15 or less radio stations. So in other words, one company could own literally 1/3 of the stations in a smaller city. And there's no limits on ownership. In other words, a company could own, well over 1,000 radio stations if they want to, as long as they're not breaking these 2 rules. The licenses have increased now to 8 years. So now one company can own a station for up to 8 years. And again, the idea of losing licenses is really rare. Again, you just got to meet public interest. And as long as you meet the public interest, you're not going to lose your license. So any questions on the Telecom Act of 1996?
Yeah, several. Can you repeat what the numbers were increased to?
4 to 8. And the third one as well?
Yes, please.
5.
5?
Yes, 4 to 8 and 5.
Okay. Thank you. And then licenses are how many years?
8.
Okay, thank you.
So these are the largest radio metro markets. So the 12 plus, if you're wondering what that means, it means people over the age of 12. So that's what they mean by 12 plus. And so the radio metro market determines advertising rates. So obviously the bigger the market, the more you can charge in advertising. So again, the bigger the market, the more you can charge in advertising. So clearly here you can see that New York is the largest radio metro market, according to the Nielsen. It's over 16 million listeners. And as you can see here, obviously it's the largest African-American or Black market in the United States. LA is a distant second, 11.4, but it's the largest, I should say, Latinx market. You can get rid of the A and the O. It's the largest Latinx market. That being said, okay, you're seeing here the figure of the largest markets. Even though New York's market is larger, obviously, by over 4 million, the LA market is oftentimes considered to be the best market for radio. And obviously we know why, because of the amount of traffic that exists in Los Angeles. And a lot of us spend a lot of time sitting in traffic. I mean, if we were in traditional in-person classes, you'd be driving to Fullerton. You wouldn't be hearing it on Zoom. And so because we spend so much time in traffic, the LA market is oftentimes considered to be the best market for radio, even though it's the second largest and smaller than New York City. In New York City, right, people are walking around or they're in the subway. So any questions on what these individuals do?
Can you go back real quick, please?
What's the question?
What was the last one for Dallas to Fort Worth?
6.3 million.
0.3 million. And then
I'm never going to ask you the size of the market, but go ahead.
And then NYC was the biggest market for what?
African Americans, Blacks.
And then was LA for what was LA's? Huh?
Latinx.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any questions on what these individuals do? No questions on what the various jobs? Crickets. I'm assuming that there's no interest in radio, at least in terms of jobs. Okay. So radio marketing. So oftentimes what radio stations do in terms of trying to promote its station, they'll promote the disc jockey. So really especially the disc jockey during drive time is sort of the face of the station. So for instance, Ryan Seacrest, right? Ryan Seacrest, I'm not sure if Ryan Seacrest still does radio in the morning because I don't listen to him, but I know he was a disc jockey on Kiss, and he was the drive time disc jockey on Kiss. And you would see his face everywhere on billboards. He really was sort of the face of Kiss FM for a while. And so these disc jockeys are used to promote radio stations, and especially the ones that work during drive time. And what radio personality reaches the most listeners through syndication? So the radio personality that reaches the most listeners through syndication was Rush Limbaugh. So I know Rush Limbaugh just recently passed away, and he also just recently, stopped broadcasting on his radio show. And so before he retired, he was attracting 15.5 million listeners. So again, 15.5 million listeners. I'm not sure if that was 15.5 million listeners per week or per month or per day, but that was the audience that he was attracting. Again, 15.5 million listeners. And again, that was Rush Limbaugh, who reached the most listeners through syndication. And so the way syndication works, it works like the exact same way as television. So what I mean by that is that just like television has all these different markets, radio has all these different markets. And so just like a television network that syndicates is going to sell its program on a market by market basis, same thing happens in radio. So you have a radio syndicator sells their programming on a market by market basis. So they sell it. Let's say that they sell Rush Limbaugh, going back to Rush Limbaugh. They're going to sell that program into a station in Los Angeles. And so that station in LA would pay the syndicator a fee. And then that syndicator is going to go to San Diego. And then that station and syndicator is going to pay the syndicator a fee, and so on and so forth. And so this is how a syndicator sells, again, radio content or radio programming on a market by market basis. And obviously they give a portion of that revenue that they collect to the radio personality like a Rush Limbaugh. Sirius XM signed Howard Stern. So Howard Stern was the person they signed. And so upon signing him, they paid him over a 5-year period, $400 million. So again, over a 5-year period, they were paying him $400 million, which is a lot of money, which means he was making $80 million a year off of his Sirius XM deal. And so now, why is he important? I kind of talked about him a little bit when I talked about the FCC and fines. He was the most fined disc jockey in the history of radio. He also was really the person that's responsible for changing FM radio. So he, like I said before, when podcasting was taking off, a lot of radio stations were getting rid of talk shows. And he really was the guy that illustrated that you could have talk shows on FM, because FM was not a place where talk shows existed prior to Howard Stern. He really is the guy that made talk shows, or illustrated that you could have a popular talk show on FM, because most talk shows at the time were usually on AM. So format, as I mentioned before, is part of the marketing. So in other words, is that radio stations will promote its format, its country format, or its adult contemporary format, or its hip hop format, whatever format it has. It will use its format to attract listeners, to market its radio station. And again, they'll come up with the playlists where they'll feature the most popular artists, and these popular artists are going to get lots of spins. Spins means a play on radio. So a single play means spin. Single play means spin. So some of these popular artists get lots of spins. It seems like, to me at least, when I listen to traditional radio, that they play the same, 8 artists over and over again every hour. So some of these popular artists gets lots of play on radio. You might hear them, 10 or 15 times a day. This is probably why all the young folks don't listen to the radio. At least the last I read, I'm not sure if this is still the case. This is not 2020. This is not 2020 information. This is 2019 information. The most popular radio song. I haven't found the most popular radio song for 2020 yet. For 2019, the most popular radio song was High Hopes, Panic at the Disco. I can't remember that song. I don't remember listening to it. But anyways, that was the most popular radio song of 2019. Now, if you're wondering and curious, so the riskier playlists happen later. So if you're going to listen to traditional radio stations like like a Kiss or something like that, you're going to listen to the same thing over and over again. If you want to hear the playlist gets expanded, it usually happens later on in the day or later on in the night during the overnight hours. That's where usually the playlist becomes broader, gets riskier, is during the later hours, usually overnight. Oh, that's a good question, Sylvia. I did skip that. So heavy rotation is 20 spins or more weekly. So 20 spins or more weekly is considered to be heavy rotation. Thank you. Okay, so, question.
There's no question. You're good.
Oh, okay. So drive time. So drive time happens Monday through Friday, twice a day. So again, Monday through Friday happens twice a day. And so what does it mean exactly? So it means that you have your superstar disc jockeys during that time. It also means you have the largest audience during that time. Hence, the radio station charges more for advertising during this time. So again, drive time happens twice a day, Monday through Friday. And what that means is that the radio station is going to feature its superstar disc jockey during that time. They're expecting the largest audience during that time because we're stuck in our cars, right? Because you're either driving from home to work or from work home or to school. And so therefore they're going to charge the most amount of money during that time. Questions on drive time? So Nielsen Audio Diary. So Nielsen Audio Diary is sort of the way that this organization, Nielsen, measures the number of listeners that listen to a specific radio station. And so it's literally measured by a diary, as you see down here for point 3 as well. Literally what people will write down what stations they listen to. And so it measures three important things. So number one that it measures that's really quite important is CUME. CUME means the number of listeners. So CUME means number of listeners. CUME is short for cumulative. So it measures the number of listeners. So CUME, short for cumulative, measures the number of listeners. Time spent listening. So it's TSL, time spent listening. So it measures how much time the listener spent listening to a particular radio station. So TSL, or time spent listening, how much time did the listener spend listening to a particular radio station? And average quarter hour, or AQH, is the average number of listeners every quarter hour. The average number of listeners every quarter hour. So this is really important for advertisers because they obviously want to know at what quarter hour do people listen the most to a particular radio station. So are they more apt to listen to a radio station at the top of the hour, right? Which is, when you go to, let's say, 5 to 6, or is it at the bottom of the hour, every half hour? So any questions on average quarter hour, the average number of listeners every quarter hour or every 15 minutes? So advertising rates are based again on the Nielsen Audio Diary, the measurements from the Nielsen Audio Diary. It's also based off of the portable people meter. So this means that Nielsen puts a device, or I should say, Nielsen pays you, I think. Nielsen pays you to place a device and attach it to your radio station. So what Nielsen is doing with the portable people meter, it's tracking what you're listening to. And it's the third part that it's based off of. It's based off of the Nielsen Audio Metro that we already talked about, that measures the size of the market. So those three factors determine how much a radio station is going to charge in advertising. Okay, so let's start talking a little bit about sports. Now, mind you, you don't have to be like a big time sports fan to do well in this part. I guess suppose just take good notes. It's nothing. I'm not going to talk about rules or anything like that. So it's pretty straightforward. So moving on to the NCAA in sports. So the original name of the NCAA that started in 1906, that was not the original name. So the original name, I'm going to go kind of slow, was Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States. So Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States was the original name of the NCAA. So Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States was the original name of the United States, or IAAUS. And eventually they changed their name to the NCAA. So anyways, the NCAA has been around since 1906. And why did it begin? It began because of football. So there was all these injuries going on with football. Who knew, right, that football is a dangerous sport, and it has been for over 100 years. And so there was a large number or a lot of young men that were suffering traumatic head injuries, or they were getting paralyzed, or they were getting killed by playing football. And so obviously quite dangerous. And so, let's see, question.
Yeah, what was the original name? It totally slipped me.
Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States.
That's a lot to write.
Yes, it is. That's why it's recorded.
Yeah.
Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States. And again, why did it begin? Began because football is dangerous. And there was a lot of kids, or young men, I should say, that were suffering traumatic injuries. And so there was this talk of actually banning football. Can you imagine if football was banned? Wow. So there was this talk of banning football, but Teddy Roosevelt thought that was a terrible idea to get rid of football. Teddy Roosevelt was kind of this old school guy, kind of a tough dude, if you know the history of Teddy Roosevelt. And he thought it was really important for these young men to play a tough sport like football. And so Teddy Roosevelt, basically, it was his idea to start an organization like the NCAA. So he brought in all these university presidents and said, hey, you know, I don't want to get rid of football, but this is kind of dangerous. And so through him talking to these university presidents, they eventually they agreed to start the NCAA. So what was the first conference? Now, if you think Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States is long, wait till you hear the first conference. So the first conference was the Intercollegiate Conference of Faculty Representation. The Intercollegiate Conference of Faculty Representation was the first conference. Later, this is going to be much simpler, later they changed their name to the Big Ten. So the first conference was the Big Ten. But the original name of the Big Ten was the Intercollegiate Conference of Faculty Representation. What a terrible name. Whew. Later known as the Big Ten. They could have just started with the Big Ten. You're right. I don't know why they called it that. Horrible. Anyways, so the Big Ten was the first conference of the NCAA. So I'm not sure what time is it. Is it? I don't think it's so true. My God, We have 2 minutes. Oh, 2 minutes. Okay. So the NCAA is a voluntary organization. It's meaning that if your university plays in collegiate sports, it doesn't have to join the NCAA. It doesn't have to be a part of the NCAA at all. And so it's voluntary. You don't have to be a part of it. But if you want your university's teams to compete in an NCAA sanctioned event, it has to be part of the NCAA. So Cal State Fullerton doesn't have to be part of the NCAA, but Cal State Fullerton does have a pretty good softball team, and they have a pretty good baseball team. And so if Cal State Fullerton wants its softball team and its baseball team to compete in these NCAA events, it has to be part of the NCAA. And so voluntary, yes, but, right? So it oversees and regulates college athletics. And so by regulating means that it's trying to prevent universities from breaking rules. And it relies very heavily on self-reporting. And so for example, I am a part of the the athletic advisory committee. I'm a part of the athletic advisory committee on campus, although we haven't been on campus in forever, but nevertheless, I'm part of the athletic advisory committee. So that means a couple of faculty members like myself and a few other faculty members from across the university meet with the athletic director, Jim Donovan. Jim Donovan is the athletic director at Cal State Fullerton. And we meet with the other athletic department folks. And so Jim Donovan will read us a report every month or whenever we meet. And basically he'll say, okay, well, we had this incident with a soccer player. We had this incident with a softball player. We had this incident with a baseball player, so on and so forth. And so, and then he tells us that, he submitted this report to the NCAA. So this is the university telling on itself. Self-reporting means that the university tells on itself. It tells the university, we committed these infractions, we're sorry. And so this keeps the university from getting in real trouble, because the last thing you want is for the NCAA to start investigating your athletic program. Does that make sense that they rely on self-reporting? So this is the reason, I don't know if any of you are USC fans. I mean, I went to USC. I guess I'm a fan because I went there by default. But anyways, this is one of the reasons why USC got into such big trouble during the Reggie Bush scandal, was because by all accounts, USC did not self-report. In other words, SC could have said they were having this issue, reported this issue to the NCAA, and maybe they wouldn't have gotten so much trouble. But because SC, I guess, tried to cover it up and didn't self-report, this is the reason why the NCAA came down on USC with the intensity of 1,000 suns. And one last thing, I think I'm running out of time. So the NCAA also tries to level the playing field. So in other words, it tries to keep the sports to be equitable in terms of competition. The NCAA doesn't want one school to dominate one sport. And so what they do is they limit the number of scholarships per sport. So again, they limit the number of scholarships per sport because they want the playing field to be equitable. They don't like, let's say the University of Alabama right now is kicking everybody's butt in football. The NCAA doesn't like that necessarily, so they try to limit the number of scholarships that are given to Alabama. It should be about the same number as Mississippi, the same number as USC, the same number as Georgia. So I think I'll end there because I do think it's 346.
Professor Puente, I have a question. What's the highest percentage that we can get off of extra credit?
Percentage, I don't know because I don't go by percentage. I go by points.
I'm sorry, how many?
So the highest number of points is 15.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Dr. Puente, I had another quick question. I saw that on the interview assignment, it says that it won't be counted towards our final grade.
That's false.
Okay. I was like,
I'm not gonna have you go out and do all that work and then say, nope, doesn't count. No.
Okay, because I
Sure.
saw that it said that and I was confused. And then also when I was like calculating my
I know,
grade.
by the way, I seen it. I couldn't figure it out either for a while. I was like going, what's going on here? I can't see why is this grade not being recorded? What's going on? I can't figure it out. But I finally figured it out. So yes, it does obviously count. But thank you for letting me know.
Okay. Yeah, because
That
I
scared
was
me for a
calculating
while.
my grade also. I noticed that my interview and assignment grade wasn't like being like counted on my final. Like I mean on my overall grade right now.
Right. Or
So I don't know
still,
if I need to open that. Yeah.
it should count now.
Okay. I'll double check. I checked like a few
It
days
should be
ago.
on there.
Okay.
It did check off. So there was
Okay.
a box that was checked. Canvas is tricky, man.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. My ex got a technology scholarship to play football. Yeah, I've heard some strange things about scholarships, Amanda. Yes. I've never heard about technology scholarship, but I've heard strange things on how certain athletes get scholarships because they're good athletes. How do we report or get points for extra credit? Marcella, you just attend, honestly. You don't have to report anything. Exactly, Carol. So I'm not sure how it's done, but ETC is able to electronically monitor when you enter the panel and when you exit the panel. I'm not sure how they do it. Well, I just know that's how they do it, but I have no idea how they do it. But yes, they're able to track it in some sort of way, which I'm not sure how they do it, but they do it. It's a technology through Zoom. Other questions, folks? Before I say goodbye, please don't forget to take your test. There's no quiz, obviously, this week, but that means the next quiz is going to be big because we're really far behind in terms of our quizzes. So I need to try to catch up. I do encourage all of you, I don't know who's still listening, but if you want to study with somebody else, certainly trade notes. It's always a good idea. But of course, you should take the exam by yourself because the questions are different or they're all scattered. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Be safe.